Good evening, Brian and Manpreet and Chandani. Thank you for participating in this roundtable. Good to see you. For the sake of consistency of simultaneous interpretation, we decided all Koreans speak in Korean. And if you can speak Korean, you are welcome to speak in Korean too. Okay, so let me, 이제부터 제가 그럼 한국말로, 우리말로 좀 이 프로그램의 목적에 대해서 간단히 말씀드리겠습니다. 저희 동아시아 연구원이 그 NDI의 후원을 받아서 한국 민주주의 스토리텔링에 관한 프로그램을 지금 세 번째 이제 시작하고 있고, 이제 이번에 시작하는 프로그램은 이제 한국이 비교적 잘하는 의제에 대해서 해외 기관들은 이제 어떻게 그런 활동을 하고 있고 그것을 우리가 벤치마킹하거나 아니면 더 좋게 만들어서 한국은 해외 민주주의 복원력을 위해서 어떻게 지원할 수 있나 그것을 이제 생각하고 고민하는 그런 목적입니다. 그래서 보통 저희가 정한 의제가 세 가지가 있습니다. 이제 선거 민주주의, 그리고 부패, 반부패, 그리고 해외 원조 이렇게 세 가지의 이제 꼭지가 돌아가는데요. 오늘은 그 첫 모임입니다. 그래서 이제 오늘은 선거 진실성, 선거 민주주의에 관한 것을 배우는데 해외에서 어떻게 하나를 보는데 전반적으로 이 프로그램이 처음 시작하기 때문에 우리가 이제 총체적으로 미국에서 해외 민주주의를 어떻게 후원하는지 그 펀딩의 어떤 구조라든지 아니면 펀딩을 할 때 지원을 할 때 어떤 원칙이라든지 어떤 주요 분야를 하는지 그러한 전반적인 흐름을 공부하는 것도 이제 들어 있습니다. 그래서 이제 그런 의미에서 지금 NED 부소장님 그리고 NDI의 이제 아태 지역 디렉터님 그리고 아시아에서 민주선거를 지원하는 암프렛의 또 찬다니 소장님 이렇게 모셨어요. 그래서 이분들이 한 10분 정도 세 분이 발표를 하시면 우리는 토론을 할 것인데 그 토론은 고려대 이제 강우찬 교수님께서 이제 사회를 봐주실 건데요. 저희의 목적은 길게 말하기보단 먼저 이제 의원님들 이제 네 분이 이제 세 명의 패널들한테 질문을 하시고 그리고 이제 또 자유롭게 이제 우리 참가자들이 자기 명패를 세워서 강 교수님이 호명하는 순서대로 질문을 하고 이제 질문을 이제 조금 끊어야 되겠죠. 거기에 대해서 이제 세 분 발제자들께서 답변을 해주시고 이러한 구조로 이번 라운드 테이블을 진행하도록 하겠습니다. 그러면 이제 더 이상 더 시간 끌지 않고 귀하게 시간을 써야 하기 때문에 브라이언 조셉 NED 부소장님께 민주주의 지원 사업 후원 구조와 전략에 대한 말씀을 듣도록 하겠습니다. 브라이언.
Thank you, Sukjon. Let me first start by apologizing for the timing. I was teaching a class at Georgetown University on democracy assistance, and really was looking forward to this opportunity, and appreciate you making the time work for me. So, thank you very much. Let me start by telling you a little bit about the National Endowment for Democracy, our origins and our funding structure, because I think it's a very interesting model for democracy assistance organizations around the world. So the National Endowment for Democracy was created in 1984 as a private, nonprofit organization governed by an independent board of directors, but fully funded by the US Congress, by the US taxpayer. The idea behind this was the United States had an interest in advancing democracy and human rights around the world, and the public money was really a public expression of American ideals and values, with the recognition that the best way to work with people on the front lines of democracy and human rights struggles around the world was through a private, non-governmental means. So really mixing a public expression of ideas and values that are part of the American DNA, with the understanding that democracy and human rights work was often better promoted and advanced through non-governmental organizations. The reason behind this was that the US government, like every government, has multiple interests in every country around the world. And the US government wanted to find a way to separate the democracy agenda from other foreign policy goals of the United States. The endowment brings together 4 American organizations. They basically represent the 4 largest sectors of organized American political life. So the National Endowment for Democracy is composed of the NED itself, which is by law a grant-making organization. And then we support 4 American organizations: the National Democratic Institute, Manpreet is the representative here, and the International Republican Institute, which are representatives of, but not part of, the American political party system. So they look to advance political parties, civil society, elections around the world. And they represent the bipartisan nature of the endowment. So at the core of the endowment is an understanding that we are promoting and advancing a system of government, not a particular political outcome. And by bringing together Republicans and Democrats in equal measure is a reflection of that. They each take a slightly different approach to the work, but neither of them engages in partisan political programming overseas. They look at the broader political environment that is core to democratic development. The other 2 parts of the National Endowment for Democracy are the Center for International Private Enterprise, which is an affiliate of the US Chamber of Commerce, the largest business association in the United States. And the 4th one is the American Center for International Labor Solidarity, which is an affiliate of the AFL-CIO, the largest trade union movement in the United States. Like with the political parties that represent Republicans and Democrats, core to the understanding of the endowment is a recognition that both private enterprise and freedom of association and collective bargaining are core components of a strong democratic society. So the structure of the endowment is built on the structure of American democracy that has relevance for countries around the world, without suggesting or presupposing that the model is the right model for every other country around the world. The Germans do it on a party-by-party basis. The Canadians have a slightly different model. The National Endowment for Democracy's model is really premised on these 4 key components of American political life. It recognizes that in the United States, to be a durable organization that will withstand changes in political governments in the United States, it has to have broad-based and deep support among these 4 organized sectors, and that strength and that structure is what gives it independence from government. So the endowment, as a publicly funded non-governmental organization, has been able to maintain its programmatic and political independence in large measure by its commitment to a singular mission of democratization, irrespective of the nature, the left-wing or right-wing nature of the regime, and by ensuring everything we do is compatible with these 4 major political forces in the United States, which are often at serious discord. Those are the structural elements of the National Endowment for Democracy. The other 2 parts of the NED are what we call a discretionary grants program. For us, a discretionary grant is a grant to any organization that's not one of the 4 core institutes, but 90% of them go to local organizations managed by the local population in their own countries working to advance democracy or human rights. So if you were to look to a country in Asia, for example, if you looked at Burma, we would be working with the independent media, women's organizations, ethnic nationality groups, a wide range of political actors in the country who have their own agendas, their own organizational structures, and their own strategies for advancing democracy. So we fund and support the 4 core institutes that do technical programming and programmatic work. And then the other half of our money goes to local organizations in their own countries working in a wide range of human rights and democracy arenas. The 2 largest for us are human rights work, which includes minorities, women, youth, religious minorities, ethnic minorities, linguistic minorities, and then independent media. Independent media can be support for independent media outlets, support for projects that look to strengthen the enabling environment, projects that look to sort of help move groups into the use of more modern communication infrastructure. That's basically what a discretionary grant for us is. So basically, core institutes, half the money, and then local organizations, smaller grants with the other half of the money. Inside the National Endowment for Democracy are also 3 initiatives. One, which is our think tank, which if any of you have read the Journal of Democracy, it's the preeminent journal. It's a quarterly academic journal that looks at democracy around the world. That's published by the National Endowment for Democracy. They also have a conferences and report department. We host a fellowship program in Washington, D.C., a fully funded fellowship program. So if you know of anyone, an activist or an academic looking to be housed in Washington, please be in touch with us. It's either a 5 or 10-month fellowship. We have a center that's dedicated to international media assistance, recognizing that one of the bedrock institutions in any democracy is a strong, vibrant, independent, and pluralistic press. That's the Center for International Media Assistance. And the third big initiative of the National Endowment for Democracy is the World Movement for Democracy, of which Suk-Jung has been a long-standing member. That's a global forum that brings together activists, politicians, labor leaders, business leaders, politicians, parliamentarians from around the world, trying to build a community of Democrats, each of whom is fighting for democracy in their own country, but that recognizes that their struggles are all linked to the broader international efforts to advance democracy. In my last minute or two, let me say a word about how the endowment, and I'll leave to Manpreet to talk about elections. We do a lot of work in and around elections, from election monitoring assistance, voter mobilization, political party strengthening. But I'll leave it to Manpreet to talk about that. The last thing I'll talk about is the National Endowment for Democracy, to maintain its independence and its funding, has developed very strong and deep linkages with the US Congress. So we're funded by the American taxpayer, and we're really a creature of the US Congress, not the executive branch. That support, we work with them to brief them on country programs, to brief them on our work on kleptocracy or counter kleptocracy or building democratic unity in Asia. We have a large engagement with them through our fellowship program, really with the understanding that the better informed Congress is about the nature of our work, the impact we're making, and how it fits in with broader national security goals is a key component of their ongoing political and financial support for the NED. We do not lobby the Congress, but we really look to engage the Congress in discussions of democracy. We have found, without question, the single best way to do this is to bring the people who are actually in the fight on the front lines to Washington and to let them tell their own stories. So our government relations team, those responsible for helping tell our story and keeping the Congress informed, we do it ourselves, and we can talk about these issues more broadly and in a sense from a Washington, D.C. point of view. But we have found that the single best way to sort of help people understand the value of this work is to let the people that we fund tell their own stories, their own priorities, their own struggles. And by doing that, it really develops strong linkages and networks and relationships with our friends on the Hill, which are critical to both funding and our political independence. Suk-Jung, that's 10 minutes, and I know you're doing everything through translation. So let me stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, thank you for inviting me.
네, 브라이언 조셉 부소장님, 감사합니다. 특히 NED의 활동이 결국은 미국 민주주의가 중요시하는 그러한 영역에서 해외에서도 활동한다는 말씀이 아주 인상적이었습니다. 그 다음은 NDI의 만프렛 아난드 아테지역 소장님께서 NDI의 활동에 대해서 말씀해 주시겠습니다.
Well, thank you, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you virtually. And I understand there's simultaneous translation, so I'll try to be, I guess, moderate in my speed to make sure that we can keep up with the translation. I was going to center my comments in three areas, and then I look forward to the discussion. First, I've actually had the privilege to be in different parts of the U.S. government when it comes to looking at support for democracy and governance around the world. I spent time as a staff member in the U.S. Congress. I've also spent time during the Obama administration at the State Department and USAID. So I was first going to talk a little bit about the roles of these different U.S. government institutions in supporting democracy and governance efforts. Secondly, talk about NDI's work and specifically how NDI complements what Brian just laid out as, I think, a good introduction with the NED. And then finally, talk through a few ideas of where I think Korean legislators and other policymakers might start to get involved. So first, in terms of the roles of U.S. government institutions in supporting democracy and governance efforts, it really does start first and foremost with the U.S. Congress. Many, I think, tend to look at a U.S. president or a U.S. president's administration first and foremost in looking at policymaking, but much of it actually starts with the U.S. Congress. And the U.S. Congress has been very active, especially of late, in ensuring that democracy and governance is part and parcel of the national security and national interest of U.S. policymaking going forward. And they do that through a number of different mechanisms. Policy making from the U.S. Congress starts with authorization. And this term authorization is meant to provide the blanket okay, the authorization, the affirmative action to provide a number of different kinds of assistance from the U.S. taxpayer, from U.S. taxpayer dollars. This can include development assistance at large, economic support, health, food security, and assistance around democracy and governance. It can also, on the flip side, provide prohibitions on assistance, and that it most often comes in the form of sanctions, as you may be familiar with. And so it is through members of Congress and committees within Congress, and in particular the Foreign Affairs committees, that provide this authorization or the policy threshold by which democracy and governance assistance is actually provided. Secondly, the Congress actually appropriates the funds to the various U.S. government agencies to go towards specific purposes in specific countries around democracy and assistance. This work is also done by members of Congress through what are called appropriations committees. And so you can imagine that there is real power in the U.S. Congress, in the legislative body, to be able to not just set the policy framework, but also how much money will go towards implementing those policies. And then finally, the U.S. Congress also plays an important role in oversight of the programs that are executed by the administration. And this is done through hearings or through other reporting mechanisms, sometimes through legislation, to ensure that the American people have oversight and visibility into these programs through their representatives in Congress. On the other side is the executive branch. And in the US system, there are two main, although not sole, but there are two main agencies within the US government who are responsible for providing democracy and governance assistance. First, as you can imagine, the State Department is, and the Secretary of State himself or herself is responsible for implementing the foreign policy of the president and adhering to the legislation therein, and making sure that the policies that are put forward are in line with and coordinated with the assistance measures, the democracy and governance assistance measures that are meant to bolster that foreign policy. Now, more and more, the State Department is not just on the diplomatic side engaging in these policy conversations, but more and more actually active in providing assistance as well. And so you have entities within the State Department that are on the front lines of the diplomatic engagement, like the regional bureaus and the embassies and ambassadors on the ground. But then you have other entities within the State Department, such as a bureau focused on democracy, rights, and labor, that actually have sums of money in which they provide to various organizations to actually implement that policy, specifically around democracy and governance. And then finally, USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, which is an independent agency within the U.S. government, which is the preeminent foreign assistance agency for the U.S. government. And its model is to not just develop assistance policies, but actually to support international and local organizations to implement programs around the world, where they have USAID missions in several countries around the world in which they have and they administer these funds. They also, USAID has become a leader in developing policies and guidelines on how best to deliver that assistance and achieve the outcomes that they've set for themselves. Now that brings us to NDI. As one of the partners of the US government, whether it's through the State Department or USAID or through the NED, as Brian has outlined, we work with various sets of donors to implement grants that are given to us, which tend to be specific to a country and to a specific body of work that is meant to be done. I know today Chandani is going to talk a lot about the elections related work, so I'll leave that to her to discuss. But we, as Brian mentioned, work in a number of different areas. It can be from political party development to legislative strengthening, to anti-corruption efforts, to inclusion of gender, youth, and other marginalized groups, information integrity, election observation. There's a whole host of things that we work on through these grants that are provided by donors. Now, depending on the grant and the nature of the program, these can last somewhere between 1 and 5 years in length. And there's always some back and forth that happens between NDI and the donor in identifying the needs, developing the theory of change of the programmatic intervention, in which you develop both our goals as well as how we set to achieve them, and some type of evaluation and learning that we can achieve through the implementation itself. Now, we do this by having offices around the world, as well as working out of our headquarters in DC. NDI has over 50 offices around the world, including in Seoul. Now, everything that we do is in partnership, and we tend to partner with local or regional implementing organizations to actually do this work. This is to ensure that what we do is partner-led, that is based in the context of the needs of a given country and of the citizens of that country. And the categories of assistance, the types of assistance that we provide, tend to fall into 2 broad categories. First is where we subgrant to local or regional organizations, where we provide some minimal assistance, but essentially the bulk of the work is done through those local or regional organizations. Secondly, we also provide technical assistance, where we provide specific expertise in key areas. So for example, if we're talking about elections, we may provide technical assistance around candidate training, for example. But we do provide expertise in a number of different areas: strategic communications, advocacy work, constituent outreach. There are a number of different areas. Finally, I know the time is coming to a close, so I'll just end with a few thoughts on ideas where legislators in Korea or policymakers in Korea could explore in thinking about what role it can play in democracy and governance assistance. First and foremost, I think I would encourage everyone to think about democracy and governance as part and parcel of your own national security strategies, of your own development agenda, of your own statements and commitments that you make in multilateral and other fora. Democracy and governance is not something separate or on the side or nice to have, but rather underpins all of these other national priorities, and it's important to think about it in those ways. Secondly, there's a lot of opportunity to participate in democracy assistance programs to gain exposure and better understand what it is this work is and what it's not, to make sure that you can dispel myths, but also understand where it is that Korea may have an important and vital role to play in democracy assistance. This is an area that I think NDI could also help with going forward if there's interest. Third, there are a number of pro-democracy actors and activists who are under attack, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, and are either living in exile or being persecuted by authoritarian regimes. I think there is a role for strong democracies in the region, such as the ROK, to provide assistance to these activists. Fourth, there is a strong tradition and track record of Korean development assistance that can be aligned, coordinated, perhaps even expanded to include broad democracy and governance goals and support work. KOICA's respect and reputation around the region is well regarded and appreciated, but we have to acknowledge that these areas of assistance, traditional areas of assistance in which KOICA and other Korean assistance has been in, whether it's economic development or infrastructure, education, what have you, that these don't operate in a vacuum. And without an environment that allows for a governance system that brings in accountability and transparency and inclusion, those development goals really can't be realized to its fullest extent. So another word to try to integrate democracy and governance in these broader goals. Let me stop there, and I look forward to the discussion.
네, 아난드 소장님 감사합니다. 어떻게 NDI가 미국 의회와 또 미국 행정부, 특히 국무부 또는 독립기관 USAID 등과 협력하면서 이런 해외 민주주의 지원을 해오고 있는지 말씀해 주셨고, 또 한국의 4가지 포인트로 부탁의 말씀도 해주셨습니다. 감사합니다. 자, 다음번에는 찬다니 와타왈라 암프렛 소장님께서 어떻게 암프렐이 이런 미국의 민주주의 후원 기관과 협력해서 아시아의 선거 공정성을 위해서 일해 오시는지 말씀 주시겠습니다.
Thank you very much, Professor. And also thank you very much for organizing this event for EAI and also the NDI. And of course, inviting ANFL to be present our work as well as how we are working with the other donor agencies or the partner agencies. My presentation, I would like to put it into three main areas. One is about that brief introduction on ANFL's background and its work. Secondly, I would like to put it into that recognition of NAD and NDI support to enhance democracy in Asia. Thirdly, I would like to, of course, that Manpreet already mentioned a lot of recommendations to the South Korean government. I also like to highlight few things about that how South Korean government can support for the regional democracy. Okay, let me start with the brief introduction on ANFL's background and its work. The Asian Network for Free Election, maybe some may hear or some may be aware, ANFL, or the famous name, has been working to advance the cause of electoral democracy for more than 25 years. ANFL was formed as a solidarity movement to oppose authoritarian and dictatorial regimes in a number of countries across the region. Today, it continues to promote democracy by working for free, fair elections. The backsliding of democracy or democratic represent has been impacting democracy and electoral process in Asia. Many Asian countries have no periodic elections, with military dictatorship or single party status trying to receive legitimacy while keeping power. Authoritarian regimes maintaining their grips by imposing repressive laws, demolishing political opposition, civil society, free media, weakening independent institutions, etc. Therefore, ANFREL conducts efforts to advocate for democratic government in many ways, in particular election observation, strengthening and cooperating with electoral stakeholders, including domestic observer groups, and advocacy campaigning against the democratic question in Asia. How we are working with the NED and NDI and how they are supporting to our democratic efforts in Asia. Especially the National Endowment for Democracy, or the NED, has been dedicated to the growth and strengthening of democratic institutions around the world for many years. As Brian has mentioned already, how they work. Their contribution is very valuable for Asia, especially when I'm speaking from my experience in Asia, as the democratic repression is widespread at present. NED has been our continuous supporter for many years, as they are providing co-funding and specific program funding, resources for democratic elections. Democratic government needs most of the donors are not priority in this current situation. In that sense, the United States government realized the importance of supporting the organizations who are working for promoting and upholding democracy. As we are aware of what is going on globally, China and Russia stand behind many authoritarian or military leaders and are trying to undermine democracy as much as they can. For instance, in Hong Kong, Cambodia, or Myanmar, some of the good example I can share with you. One of our main activities is international observation of elections held in Asian countries. This is successful techniques to ensure sound elections and gradual improvement is, however, now being copied by RUG states, which feel fake or zombie observers coming to rubber stamp elections that could not otherwise be considered or free and fair. I would like to share one example in 2017, what happened in Cambodia. Cambodia, you know that Cambodia government is for almost 3 decades at continuing the authoritarian regime, and 2017 elections, they tried to bring the zombie observers to legitimize the elections. And for support in many organizations in Asia, as well as the member-based organization. Right now, we have 29 members across Asia, and they are mostly working for promoting, advancing democracy. They are the civil society organization based in the different countries. I'm happy to share in South Korea also, we have member that is PSPD. These are in particular through our effort through the development of citizen observer groups that are working to promote free, fair elections. Further, they are very much keen on developing and capacitating young people on democratic engagement. That is the NED mostly working on that area. And NED are very much concerned about the current democratic regression in Asia. In particular, Cambodia, Myanmar, Thailand, and the rest. Hence, they are closely working with the civil society organization to advocate for democratic government. My experience of collaborating with NED is that we continuously dialogue with stakeholders about each country's specific democratic situation, identify needs and prioritizing the program agenda according to these needs. NED mostly like a NED is mostly like a partner organization. They open to dialogue. They are continuously discussion with their own partners and the stakeholders and identify and the regional needs or the country needs. That is I emphasizing that they are effort. And also that I would like to share about another US organ is the National Democratic Institute. which is also closely working with ANPL, in particular with their support in the most challenging countries like Myanmar, Bangladesh, etc. Very recent experience with Myanmar was to observe 2020 controversial elections. I think you may aware of that. 2020 general elections held during the pandemic, and of course that ANPL able to deploy team of observers with the support of NDI and other like-minded donors. Currently, junta or the military junta is trying to undermine that elections, trying to find the election frauds, but we are very stand on that elections. Because of that, we observe the election. We are openly saying that it is free elections. That is that whatever the saying is not fair to say that military junta is saying. The election held during the unconstitutional, the undemocratic constitution, it is already that not fair to elections, which was developed by the junta, not for the people. Actually, that's why we are stand for that Myanmar elections. Openly say it is free, it is fair enough. Further, ANPL and NDI closely work for developing international observers for previous Bangladesh elections. However, country did not welcome the observers, did not give accreditation and visa. This is the current trend. Most of the authoritarian government doesn't like the international observers or the democratic election observers. They try to bring that zombie or the undemocratic or legitimize elections. There are elections ways to bring that legitimize in the elections. This is very much clear that how strengthen electoral actors as the democratic elections are very challenging in many countries, as I shared earlier. NDI is coordinating with domestic observer groups and especially the Global Network for Domestic Election Monitors, GENDM, to strengthen their efforts through various programs and capacity building. ANPL is ensuring their support the both parties like NED or NDI or any other donors or any other partners to make a sense of democracy. Hence, as part of the accountability to the donor, providing periodic reports, regular meetings to update about the work as well as the situation. And ANPL is also welcoming their suggestions as they have been working in the other regions as some best practices are important to transfer to the Asian region. Finally, I would like to give our recommendation to South Korean government. Of course, that Manpreet has come out with the strong and also the some of the key points for the recommendations. The South Korean government can look into that one of the most democratic countries and most advanced economic in Asia. It is recommended that the South Korean government look into the United States model in supporting human rights and democracy in other countries. Local and regional CSOs in Asia would be largely benefited if Korea could support their work. Thank you very much. Looking forward some of the discussion of some of the clarifications from your honorable legislator.
네, 와타홀라 소장님 귀한 말씀 감사합니다.